Should we turn it over to the leaders? Because we got a bunch of songs we can share if you want.
Good afternoon. Actually, what a great way to get us started. Another round of applause for Mosaic Harmony. Great, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Robert Ross, the Chief Operating Officer here at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, and welcome. I have a great pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, and I was talking to her earlier how I walk the mall every weekend on Saturdays and Sundays for exercise, and been watching the last several months as the museum comes together, and you can tell it's almost there. You can look through the first floor and you can see it's starting to come together, and it'll be opening this year. So I wanted to provide an introduction for Mary Elliott, who is the museum special at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is scheduled to open later this year. I can say September of this year, so we're really looking forward to it. She has helped research, conceptualize, and design Slavery and Freedom, the inaugural exhibition. Her work includes consulting with expert scholars, securing collection donations, including the pre-Civil War slave cabin that will be featured in the museum. She has over 20 years' experience in researching and presenting African American history and culture. The focus of her research is African Americans from antebellum slavery through the Jim Crow era, with a specific concentration on migration and community development. And it says here her research has taken her to Virginia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Oklahoma, covering subject matter including slavery and freedom in America, Reconstruction, the all-black towns of Oklahoma, and the National Negro Business League. She's a graduate of Howard University, right near here, and Catholic University's Columbus School of Law on the other side. Mary has been a consultant to various organizations, including the National Visionary Leadership Project, the Reginald Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History, and the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. It is truly my pleasure to introduce Mary Elliott.
Good afternoon. This is very humbling seeing everyone here this afternoon, and it's really a pleasure to have you all come out this afternoon to see this presentation. I want to thank the leadership of the Washington Hospital Center, and particularly my friend Sylvia Ballinger, who invited me to participate. So, and I have to acknowledge a colleague who I rode over here with. She's here every year, and she said, I saw your name on the program. I can't believe you're going to be speaking. And so if my friend Dory Butter would please stand. She's in the Mosaic Choir. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to extend greetings on behalf of the leadership of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, particularly our director, Lonnie Bunch. He's always excited about us getting the word out about the excitement of this museum, and it really is an exciting project, and we're thrilled about it opening this year. I have a brief slideshow I'd like to share with you and talk with you a little bit about the museum and all the excitement that we have in store for you all. So, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a long time coming. For years, many people had talked about this museum, and John Lewis lobbied to make sure that we could get this museum, Congressman John Lewis. But this was in the hearts and minds of African Americans. Not too soon after the Civil War, you had Civil War members of African American members of the Civil War who fought in the Civil War who said we need a museum that would honor the service of African Americans to this country. And that discussion started around 1915, and they pushed to have a museum around 1929, and then of course President Bush signed it into legislation around 2003. So let's get started. This is the design of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And you can see that the museum will be on the mall and it will be prominently placed right near the foot of the Washington Monument. What's important about this is we are the last museum in the Smithsonian Institution that will be on the mall. We are one of the 19 museums in the Smithsonian. And we are excited to be prominently located. And we actually broke ground around 2014, and you've seen the building coming up above ground since then. And what you probably don't realize is you see the building now, and you see this beautiful dynamic structure, but in fact, that structure goes almost 5 stories below ground. Yeah, so what's really exciting is below ground, we have our history gallery, and that history gallery is really the foundation of this museum. So it will tell the story of American history through the African American lens. So everybody will see themselves in these stories about American history, but told through the African American lens. And of course, this is the building now. We've moved away some of these panels. You can now see a little bit more into the building, the first level. We are proud to say that this building was designed by an African-American team of architects. The group is Freelon, Bond, and Agi. David Agi is a gentleman who is of African descent who came up with this fabulous design for the museum, and you'll notice the skin around the museum is based on the ironwork that was conducted by African Americans in South Carolina and Louisiana. So that is the filigree type design you see wrapped around the building. And we are, again, I have to emphasize, we are excited to be prominently placed on the mall. But what's really powerful is we're right there near the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, and the White House, and the Capitol Building. So this story is fully a part of the American story. This is a preview of what you will see when you go down into the history galleries. Now let me share with you that our museum is actually close to 400,000 square feet. And of the history galleries, we have 42,000 square feet. What you see here at the bottom, that's the exhibit that I'm working on. So I really appreciate that wonderful introduction, but believe it or not, my exhibit is one of 11. And so my exhibit that I'm working on is about 18,000 square feet. And I've had the pleasure of working with a dynamic team of colleagues, including the co-curator, Dr. Nancy Burkaw, as well as our Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs, Dr. Rex Ellis, and a wonderful young lady who is working on her PhD, but she is also working with us full-time now, and her name is Sion Walden-Michael. So let me point out that this is the Slavery and Freedom exhibit. Just above that, we have an exhibit on segregation, and then just off to the side, there's an exhibit called A Changing America. Collectively, these exhibits actually take you through from early 15th century Africa and Europe all the way to today. So you'll be able to get the expanse of the slavery and freedom experience from, again, the early 15th century through colonial period, through antebellum. And then you will go into the segregation exhibit, which starts at 1878 and goes all the way to 1968. And then you'll see the exhibit on A Changing America, which is 1968 to today. Above that, we have several other exhibits. And again, that was below ground. We have in total 11 exhibits. And of those 11 exhibits, I've mentioned to you the history galleries, which you see here. But we also have a gallery on community. Now, I'm really excited about this because the gallery on community includes this particular exhibit called The Power of Place. The Power of Place is going to feature stories that are significant to all of American history, but particularly to the African American story. So some of those stories include the Tulsa race riot, where the town of Tulsa, where the city of Tulsa was bombed from the air, and there was a race riot that ensued that tore apart a lot of the black community. But you'll also see stories about Martha's Vineyard. You'll see stories about an early black ranching community in Indiana. So you'll see all of these different sites in The Power of Place. We also have an exhibit called Making a Way. Making a Way Out of No Way is a wonderful exhibit that speaks about the institutions in the African American community, from the church to fraternities and sororities. Even you'll find out about Black entrepreneurs, Black scientists, inventors, many more things. But it's a powerful exhibit that will tell a cross-section of the experiences of African Americans and their contributions to the American story. We also have the exhibit on military and the sports exhibit. Now, what I have to tell you about the sports exhibit is we have this dynamic young curator. His name is Damian Thomas. And Damian Thomas's approach to this exhibit is it's not just about changing the game, it's about the game changers. And you're going to find out the full picture of the experience of African American athletes and their contribution to not only on the field, but also to the world. And then finally, we have our exhibit on culture, our galleries on culture. And that includes exhibits Musical Crossroads, Cultural Expressions, Taking the Stage, and Visual Arts. Musical Crossroads, of course, will speak about music, and we have all types of features in there, including some of the objects that some of you all are probably already familiar with. The mothership from Funkadelic. Yeah. So everybody knows about that. And then we also have Chuck Berry's Red Cadillac. Yeah, so we have quite a few things that are really cool that everyone loves. And Cultural Expressions is a great exhibit that covers a cross-section of topics, including foodways, including mannerisms, including style. So we're thrilled to have you all see that. And Taking the Stage is focused on not just theater, but also film, television, so you'll learn about African American experience in Taking the Stage as well, and visual arts. Our visual arts exhibit is amazing. Visual arts covers a cross-section of different genres of art, but what you'll really learn is that instead of looking at artists as African American artists, these are American artists. And you'll see everything from early landscape paintings to, all types of abstract paintings. So we're thrilled for you all to see everything that we have to offer there. And then finally, on the second floor, we'll have our section where we will have a library, we will have a genealogy department, we will have the Center for African American Media and the Arts, and then a youth center. So that's all the exciting stuff about the museum. But we're here to talk about service as a part of our story, right? Service is a part of us. And it's very important for us to recognize two things. What is service? And the other is, how do we define us? So again, I told you, this is an American story told through the African American lens. But us is all of us. It crosses generations, it crosses race, right? So, looking at this through the story of the African American, we think of service and we think of, some people might not readily think of it, but we think of the church. So early on, the church or a mosque, African Americans used these sites of worship as places not just for sanctuary, but also for service, as well as for education, organizing, communication, civic engagement. This is Mother Bethel Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Mother Bethel Church is the first church of the African Methodist Episcopal denomination, which was founded by Richard Allen, Bishop Richard Allen here. Bishop Richard Allen and Reverend Absalom Jones in 1783 were called on for service when Philadelphia suffered from the yellow fever epidemic. They collectively gathered together the African American community and they helped address this issue that was facing all of Philadelphia. Black, white, everyone suffered. But these two men galvanized this community and they helped in every way possible. From digging graves to providing nursing services, they did everything. In the end, they were chastised in the media. And so what you see here, what you see here is their publication that they put together to speak back to the media, to go through the details about what exactly they did to actually help during this epidemic. And this is part of our history. This is service in the early years of the African American community in colonial America. Benevolent and fraternal organizations. How many here know about the Masons? Exactly. You notice everyone who raised their hand, it wasn't just black people, right? Everybody knows. There's a gentleman, Prince Hall. Prince Hall was around during the colonial period, and he founded the Prince Hall Lodge, which is the African-American branch of Masons. But Prince Hall also petitioned for rights of African-Americans. He was a free man, but he aligned himself with enslaved African-Americans as well, he and other members of the Masons. Always of service, always seeking freedom, always seeking justice. The Masons, like other fraternal organizations, as well as other benevolent societies, helped to make sure that African Americans received what they needed in terms of finances. They also helped when it came to burying their dead. You'll find a lot of burial societies. You find a lot of organizations such as these groups that actually served residents of the black community and even extended beyond the black community to be of service to everyone, right? What you see here is a picture of a member of the Masons. This is a picture of a Masonic apron that we were able to bring into our collection. It's from Chicago, and we're thrilled to show that with a lot of other materials from the Masons. You can currently see some of those items on display in our temporary exhibit. I'm going to tell you about that shortly. And then, of course, we have the branch of the Order of the Eastern Stars, and the Eastern Stars is the group of women associated with the Masons. Now, I know everyone here knows about the Divine Nine. Am I right? The Divine Nine, the fraternities and sororities, African-American fraternities and sororities. There are 9 large, highly recognized fraternities and sororities. Right now, I have thrown up here, are there any Deltas in the room? No? Well, it's a wonderful organization. And so is Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and we have to say it like that. Okay, so you can tell there's a little bit of competition amongst us, but it's all one big sisterhood, right? I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, but Delta Sigma Theta is a dynamic organization of women who, like the other sororities, have really given their time and their talent. You will learn about the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority that initiated health services down in Mississippi. Delta Sigma Theta just recently celebrated their Founders Day, and all of these organizations have tenets that they live by, tenets that we perform. We actually look at arts and culture, we look at health, we look at education. Health is a huge part of that, okay? So all of these organizations work together in the community. They build structures for delivering health services. They focus on mental health, they focus on physical health, you name it. So the sororities and fraternities are a huge part of service. Now what I'm showing you, these are actually organizations, but this is important because the African American community collectively pulls together resources, and it does come back to that statement, making a way out of no way, right? Finally, I have this series of images on the midwives, and we were fortunate to get a series of images from Life magazine that were taken earlier of midwives in the black community. And this is really a great story because we can talk about all of these wonderful organizations, institutions that we know about that are more prominent, but to understand that grassroots, we had African Americans in the community that really dug deep and relied on what had been passed down to them to help get through life in many ways. And so we have a group of women who served as midwives, and you can actually see this story on display in our current temporary exhibit. We have a temporary exhibit at American History, the National Museum of American History, and it is called Through the African American Lens. And that particular exhibit features objects that give more of an insight on our collection in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And of course, some of those things will not be on display in the museum, so I highly recommend that you take time out to go and see those now while you can, because we have everything from all of what I showed you earlier, visual arts, musical crossroads, as well as just the community story. So lastly, I want to take you through, because this gave you a snapshot of the museum. It also gave you a snapshot of how service has played out in the African American community. But I just want to show you a little bit about slavery and freedom, and I want you all to understand how we are telling this story in the museum. So one of the things we talk about in particular is that we can talk about slavery and freedom, we can talk about all of these stories, but you really have to have a human face for these stories. We look at how African Americans changed the nation, physically, socially, culturally, economically, politically. This is a scene of a swamp in South Carolina, low country. Now you just put that snapshot in your mind. This is a shot of a low country rice field. That swamp is what this looked like before. You had enslaved Africans who came in and cleared this land and created these low country rice fields that take up the landscape. It is the largest earthworks that's ever happened in the world, right? And so enslaved people worked in these fields for years, cultivating rice. And this is a demonstration of the wealth that was generated by all of that work. This is a plantation home down in Louisiana. So what I just showed you makes you think about the economics of this story. And also in some ways politics, because profit generates power. But the human story is this. There are people like this gentleman, Solomon Williams. Solomon Williams was a master blacksmith down in Louisiana. Now, we could tell you his story and just put a label on the wall and say, Solomon Williams was a master blacksmith in Louisiana. He worked at X plantation. But Solomon Williams was a whole person. And so this is some of the stuff that you're going to learn at the museum. Through work, Solomon Williams was not educated, but he designed this masterpiece of a drill bit without any education, no background in math. And this was part of his work, right? That same talent was used in his life. He used his blacksmithing skills to create this marker for the grave site for his wife. But understand that that same talent was used as the blacksmith on the plantation to create restraints like this that were put on the enslaved. So what you'll see is you'll learn the full picture of people from life, work, and enslavement in the slavery gallery. The other thing that I know all of you are really interested in finding out a little bit more about are some of the objects. And I'm going to do this really quickly because I know I have a brief period, but I wanted to make sure I shared some of this with you. This is taken from our Changing America exhibit, and you see folks looking at the Nat Turner Bible. We have Harriet Tubman's shawl, and we have shackles, child shackles from the transatlantic slave trade. This is a Lowbie Amulet. The Lowbie Amulet was produced by a member of the Lowbie tribe in Africa. The amulets were carried, often hanging off of rifles. They were used as a way of protection. This one in particular was for protection from being subjected to the slave trade. This is the Fox Wages book. Now, you've heard me talk specifically about Black, white, non-African American. One of the things I really want people to understand is we are telling the full story. This Fox Wages book will be in the Slavery and Freedom exhibit. Why is it important? Because there were men who actually risked their lives to serve on slave ships because they didn't have enough money to take care of their own families. Now, someone would say, why would someone need to know that? But it's a full story. You need to know that, right? From the investors in the slave ships to those who actually served on the slave ships. This is a powder horn. We are very fortunate. We call this one of the jewels in our crown. This is the powder horn that was carried by Prince Simbo, who was an African-American man who served as a patriot in the Revolutionary War. This is an ornate, dynamic silver teapot. It is one of only 9 still existing that was produced by a master silversmith named Peter Benson, an African-American man born free who did business between Philadelphia and the Virgin Islands. This is a slave dealer's business card. It's one of, I believe we have 2. And this is a very powerful piece because the slave dealer's business card shows you the very the reality of the business of the trade, okay? And when you look at these things, when you come into the museum, please make sure you read all the details because it tells you a lot about the business and about the folks involved. This is a picture of a young lady. We have a dynamic collection of images from early period up to today that really capture the human story of this experience. And this is the picture of a young enslaved girl with her white charge. And this is a handheld Emancipation Proclamation. So you wonder, how in the world did word get out that people were free? Well, there were actually soldiers who carried these handheld Emancipation Proclamations and shared the news with people from site to site. And so we are fortunate enough to have one of these handheld Emancipation Proclamations. And finally, I'll share with you that this is a picture of the slave cabin that we acquired. The slave cabin will be in the Slavery and Freedom exhibit. The slave cabin, along with another large structure, we have an amazing log cabin that was produced by an African-American man shortly after emancipation. The slave cabin was located in Edisto Island, South Carolina. These are, and this is an important story, and this is what I will close with. The folks you see in this picture are descendants of the enslaved families who lived in these cabins. The cabins were inhabited up through 1980. They did not have any water, they did not have any electricity, but they were inhabited up through 1980. This is a story I'm happy to close on. When we acquired this cabin, we were contacted by the Edisto Island Historic Preservation Society. The Edisto Island Historic Preservation Society is predominantly white. They received this cabin from the descendants of the plantation owners. They wanted to preserve the cabin, put it on display, but they couldn't afford to. And they heard that we were looking for a slave cabin. So we went down and we looked at it and we said we would take the cabin. We were very excited about that. What's really powerful is the excitement surrounding this cabin, because everyone is just thrilled to know that this story will be told, and it will be told through such a dynamic object. But what you should understand is, at the site, when we were collecting this cabin, you see everyone in this photo. Now, when you look at the photo, you see black, you see white, you see cross-section of ages, you see different genders. You probably don't realize that it's also different ethnicities. We had Latino there, we had Native American folks there. And so this brought everyone together on this site to collect this cabin. And it was a very powerful experience. But even more powerful was bringing together the descendants of the enslaved and the descendants of the slaveholding family. And they all know each other because we all live together, right? We know each other's families. We grew up together. We know the ugly history, but we also know the story of survival and resilience. And so this is going to be in the exhibit, and you'll be able to really have a deeper understanding of this American story through this particular object and many others that I've mentioned. So we reach out. We are working with Edisto Island, Cane River, Senegal. We're doing work internationally as well. And this is your exhibit, your museum. So we are excited to have you come to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated will be represented, as well as all of you within these walls. And we're looking forward to seeing you in September. Thank you. I think we have time for just a few questions, and I'll do my best. I know about slavery and freedom, but I'll do my best to answer any other questions that I can. And what I can't answer offhand, I'm going to call on Dory. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, real quick. So of all these artifacts that we've collected, for you, what was the most mesmerizing? I mean, you secured Shackles, you got the cap, and what was the most unique thing that you collected? Was it hard to get?
There's an object that we collected that will be on display. And it's it's really kind of powerful, but it's unfortunate that you all can't see and touch these things before they're in, behind glass. But this object, it's one thing to look at it, it's another thing to hold it. So I had the good fortune, it'll sound odd to say that, to hold this object, but it's an actual whip. And the whip has this heavy metal ball on it. And when you hold it in your hand, it is mind-blowing to think about someone actually gearing up to hit someone with this whip and that it spins. And so the thought of that, it just blew my mind. I think I was just stopped dead in my tracks. That and child shackles. Because it's one thing to think about shackles, you see them. I mean, come on, we've all seen shackles around in different exhibits. But child shackles, so tiny that all I could think to myself was, what would a child do that they would have to be restrained like that? So those are the ones that really have blown my mind. The slave cabin was powerful, but I think the slave cabin is because of the story behind it. Yeah.
Anybody else any questions?
Any other questions? Oh, here's one.
You talk loudly.
Okay.
I caught the tail end of MedStar's story. It was a gentleman telling you go out to try to find items for the exhibit.
Yeah.
But I was just curious, how many people actually you have on your screen that are looking for the items?
Everybody. Like when I say everybody, we even have people who are administrative staff who say, I talked to this lady last week and she told me that she has X. But officially looking, we have a whole curatorial staff. So for each exhibit, let's say we have one or two curators, and then behind them we have museum specialists, we have a team of researchers, but it's a collective effort. The other thing is things come to us in different ways. So we have people who call us and say, I have objects, people who call us and say, I've heard of an object, and people who just call and say, I'd like to help out, tell me what you're looking for. But yeah, it's a cross-section of people.
Here you
go. I just was wondering, I realize it's predominantly the story of like North American, African American communities. Does it also include like South America or Central America?
Great question. So our director, who is absolutely dynamic, charged us with making sure we have these through lines in the exhibit. So in all the exhibits. So he said, make sure you touch on everything: gender, identity, race, and the diaspora. So just in Slavery and Freedom alone, we talk about Africa, we have a feature on Cuba, we talk about Haiti. So we cover it all because we even have the story of the Black Atlantic and we have the story of the African diaspora, but it's a through line. So you'll see it bleed through in all of these different stories. Mm-hmm. Sure.
As a lifelong English teacher, I've included many Black writers, and I want to know what exhibit you have for the literary accomplishments of.
So literature will be featured in our culture gallery, and we actually have a young lady who collected the papers of James Baldwin. Yeah, so we're really excited about that, and she is becoming our James Baldwin expert. So she's actually supposed to travel to Paris to speak about James Baldwin at a conference there focused just on his life and his involvement internationally on the issues of race. So we have quite a few first edition books, but let me just share with you that literature will be throughout the museum. So what we tried to do, a lot of people said, well, are you going to have an exhibit just on this, an exhibit just on this? But what we tried to do is blend throughout the museum all of these different themes. So, for example, in Slavery and Freedom, we have first edition copies of 12 Years a Slave, first edition copies of Alado Equiano's narrative, and we have first edition copies of Phyllis Wheatley's book, as well as Benjamin Banneker's Almanac. You had a good turnout.
I have two questions. The first question is, will the museum be free?
Yes, the Smithsonian's are always free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will they have a theater in the museum?
I'm sorry?
A theater.
Oh, a theater? We have a theater space. So, and that is really a space where there'll be live performances as well as we'll show films. So we do have a dedicated theater space. Yes. Yes.
Cafeteria.
What are we looking at? What are we tasting?
Soul food.
Well, I can't give it all away, but what I can tell you is, just like we are curating exhibits, we are curating the cafeteria. So that should get you excited. One last question, because I know we have to wrap up the program. Yes.
I wanted to ask about genealogy.
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of things can you expect to find there, since a lot of African American families is very hard to trace your genealogy?
Well, right now, everything is being is in planning. That was one of the last things we were planning. But what I can tell you is we are the only Smithsonian, I think that's right, Dory, who has a genealogist on staff. So we have a professional genealogist on staff, and she's preparing to build a team of supporters to help answer all questions and help guide people through their genealogical research. Now, what's great about that is this young lady, while she is expert in African American genealogy, she actually comes to us from the Daughters of the American Revolution. So, that said, you don't have to be black to go see her. So, I encourage everyone to talk to her. Her name is Hollis Gentry, and she is absolutely dynamic. So we're really excited for everyone to come and use her services. Notice that word service again. And this is the last question in the back. Well, so a lot of people ask about volunteers. Believe it or not, we put out a call for volunteers, people to apply. Folks have applied. We have anywhere from CEOs to scholars to, the young lady who stays at home, takes care of her kids, and just loves history, right? We've had so many applications that I think we took in 200 volunteers out of a pool of 1,000. But that should not deter you from applying. So we will probably have more calls put out for volunteers, and I highly encourage everyone to continue to visit our website, not only for the application, but also because we continue to put information on there that there are many things I spoke of on the surface, but there are a lot of stories that are included on our website. Our social media is absolutely dynamic. We had a public program that within the day had 20 million hits on social media. And so you really should just stay up with us because we have a lot to offer. So, okay, you guys, I had a fabulous time. This is wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. We just want to thank Mary for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
This
Thank
is
you.
great. Thank you. We have to get you in.
Yes, please. I will leave you the card.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in closing, thank you everybody for being here for our Martin Luther King Day, and what a wonderful presentation to celebrate his legacy. So thank you again, Mary. And in closing, I turn it back over.
We're very proud. Mosaic Harmony has been very honored and privileged to have been the Washington Hospital Center choir for many years, and we're glad to be back. Please be sure to go to our website if you want to find out all about us, mosaicharmony.org, and it'll tell you all. We're interfaith and interracial community choir. We don't have auditions. We're always looking for more folk to come sing with us. So the website, mosaicharmony.org, will tell you everything. On keys is Christian Davis. On percussion is Alan Caesar. Look at all this digital music. Isn't it awesome? Assistant Directors, Ms. Laura Ronstead, and we're dusting off an old song, and we know you'll be able to join us as we sing it. With your service, with your help,